Hello and welcome to What's Your Story? We have a great story for you today. My guest is an author, Mr. Stephen Murray. Stephen, welcome.
Thank you, Judy, and I appreciate the invite to appear on your show.
Oh, we're so glad to have you here. Stephen was born in England, but he lived throughout Southern Africa, so I'm going to ask him some questions about that. And he's been traveling all over the world, but most importantly about Stephen is he is an author who writes he is an author who writes in multiple genres. Now, I'm having trouble with my words today, so sorry. In multiple genres. So, I mean, you write different types of books, which is interesting. Usually people write romance, or they write mystery, or they write self-help, but you write all these things.
That's correct, I do.
Okay, so tell us about some of your books.
Well, I write in multiple genres in part because I enjoy the challenge of writing. It's got to be something new and something different. And they always say write about what you know. And to be truthful, I write about what I don't know. The first two books, I was told I needed to write women's fiction. I thought, I don't know squat about women's fiction, nothing at all. But I stumbled across the idea about writing about Las Vegas wedding chapel. And I thought, I'm going to see if I can write for women and do this book. So that was the first book that came out. It's called The Chapel of Eternal Love.
And that was an award-winning book. That won some awards.
It did,
yeah.
Yes, much to my surprise.
And it was The Chapel of Eternal Love.
That's correct. That's correct.
And they were wedding stories about Las Vegas.
You know, we are the marriage capital of the world, and so we always focus on the sin side of Las Vegas, and I thought it'll be nice to focus on the other side of Las Vegas. You know, we've got more churches here, more wedding chapels than anywhere else in the world. So in this book, the reader spends a day at the wedding chapel, and you meet all these couples as they come and go, why they've fallen in love and why they've come to Las Vegas. And much to my surprise, I was encouraged to publish it. I did. And then I started getting emails saying, well, what happened to these couples after they left the chapel? My first reaction was, these aren't real people. But you know what? To the readers, they were. They'd invested their time, their emotions, and they wanted to know. So the second book was a sequel called Return to the Chapel of Eternal Love. And it revisits all the couples in the first book 5 years down the road and where their lives' paths have taken them.
Cool.
And it was fun because I never planned it.
And did you have to make up their lives as far as what they were 5 years later?
Yes.
What
had happened, and it was. And again, you're talking to somebody who's never been married. So as you talk about write about what you don't know. I don't know anything about being married. And I don't know anything about wedding chapels or anything like that. So that was really, those two books were really off the cuff.
How absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
You know, I used to be a wedding chapel minister.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did that for a short time. And my most memorable couple was a man and woman who came to Las Vegas for a pool tournament. I mean, shooting pool, not pool.
Sure.
But for a pool tournament. And they got married with their pool cues.
Oh.
They both had their sticks, and she looked kind of like Olive Oil from Popeye.
Popeye.
Yeah, and they were the cutest couple. It was so wonderful, but the most fun night to marry people is on Halloween because every wacko in the world shows up.
Cool. Well, maybe you should be writing a book about it, Las Vegas. Maybe you can pick up my book and do a further sequel on it.
Maybe we could do something together and come up. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yes.
But but I mean, I can't believe you wrote about the wedding chapel, and then you wrote a murder mystery.
That's correct. And to be clear, I've never murdered anybody either.
You haven't?
No, I might have felt like it from time to time, but no. I wrote we had a dinner party, my business partner, myself, for our clients, and he wanted to do something slightly different. He said, you know, instead of talking business, let's make it a murder mystery party. And I said, well, you know, you do that. I don't want to do it. So he said, well, you're the writer. He said, you write a story. So I did. And then I thought, I'd like to turn this little story into a full book. And it's about a very wealthy Beverly Hills couple. They made their money in the music industry, and they're celebrating 25 years of marriage. And They live in Beverly Hills and they take their close friends in their dysfunctional family on the QE2 to celebrate. And I did it that way because I had traveled on the QE2. So I knew something about the ship,
Yes.
but I knew nothing about Beverly Hills mansions. My life didn't go that path.
Right.
And as the ship's come back from England to New York and they're all having a good time, one of the party gets killed. And of course the murder's got to be solved before the ship docks in New York, otherwise everybody scatters. So it's what they call a cozy murder mystery. You know, there's no graphic sex, there's no graphic violence, or there's no expletives. You could buy it for your grandmother, and
It's just a fun little murder.
it's just a fun, cozy murder mystery. And Agatha Christie,
Yes.
I wouldn't compare myself to Agatha Christie, but it's that style of book.
But
you know.
it won awards too, didn't it? You just win all kinds of awards.
Well, I don't know that it won awards per se, but it has been on. There's an organization called Authors Den. Don't know
Yes.
if you're familiar with it.
So it's critically
It keeps
acclaimed.
getting, yes, critically acclaimed. It's been up to number 1 on the murder mystery books and top of their 100 most popular books quite a few times, and all of a sudden it disappears, and then I go and have a look, and lo and behold, it's popped back again.
That's
So,
wonderful.
Yes,
That's wonderful.
that was a fun ride too. I really enjoyed that one.
And then you did one about Christmas, discovering the spirit of Christmas or the
Yes.
Christmas spirit.
That one came out after I wrote a book called Discreetly Yours, and that shows the sin side of Las Vegas. I wrote, you know, we live in a city it's a strange dichotomy, really, because we're known as the Sin City, but we're also the marriage capital of the world. I mean, how do you connect those two to make a fun city to live in?
I had a guest recently, Giovanna Sardelli, and she grew up here, and she said, you know, Vegas has that slogan, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. She said, so what we're doing is we're inviting people, bring your worst behavior and come to our city, you know? And really and truly, we kind of have done that.
Yes, we have. But it's kind of nice, really, because it's, you know, whatever goes, everybody can live their lives as they want, and there's nothing wrong with that.
And I think most people behave better than we think they do.
Probably.
I'm going
But
to give them the benefit of the doubt.
There you go. And Indiscreetly Yours, I have to tell you, there was no research done on this, 100% imagination. It's about 3 very beautiful, sophisticated, elegant, classy ladies. They work for the most exclusive escort agency in Las Vegas. And the guy that runs it treats them like dirt. He really does. So one day they decide they've had enough. This is his A-team, these 3 ladies. And they decide to come up with the perfect crime to get rid of him. And you're with these ladies as they plot and they plan, they connive and they scheme and they execute the murder. Then, of course, they have to live with the consequences. And so it's a murder and it's a mystery, but it's not a murder mystery. You know right from the get-go who's going to get killed. The mystery then becomes, did they actually come up with a perfect crime? Are they going to get away with this? Or did they overlook one tiny little detail that brings everything crashing down? So, again, there's a lot of implied sex and things like that, and there's a little bit of violence because Frankie, the guy that runs the agency, really treats them badly. But it's not excessive, and again, believe it or not, it sells very well when I go and speak at senior centres. They all seem to gravitate towards that book. So, and at first I speak at one senior centre every time I come out with a new book, and I didn't on this one, and the activities director said, why haven't you bought your new book? And I said, I don't think it will appeal. She said, well, bring it along, talk about other books and bring that one and see what happens. And it sold like hotcakes.
Everybody bought that one.
Ever since then, I've been taking it, and it always sells.
Now, you know, we seniors need a little excitement in our lives. So what do you do for excitement when you're not writing? What kind of things do you do? Music, concerts?
Yes, I like music. I go to quite a lot of concerts, and like music across the board. I like a lot of pop concerts and a lot of musical theatre and things like that. Yesterday we went to see La Traviata over at the UNLV. You know, I like opera. light opera, but nothing overly heavy, of course. But yes, I like music. I like current affairs. I like dining out, and I still like to travel. I like to take little trips here and there, and of course, COVID squashed a lot of that.
Yeah, it did. It did. But now, you lived in Southern Africa, not just South Africa, but throughout many of the countries in Southern Africa,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And there's a lot of cultural differences between that part of the world and Las Vegas. How did you end up here?
Yes, yes. That's actually very, very true. And life in Africa was very different, especially when I was growing up there, because we didn't have the communications back then
No.
that we have now. I mean, you can see what Africa's like on TV and what have you. But when I was growing up, certainly in my formative years, they didn't even have TV in Africa. And when we went out, it took my father 3 days to fly there. And my mother followed with my brother and sister and myself on a ship. Took two weeks to get to Cape Town, and then a steam train all the way up through the Kalahari Desert up to what was then Southern Rhodesia. So it was very different. And then the family moved down to a country, it's now called Lesotho, but then it was
Yes.
Basotho land.
Yes.
And the capital city, Maseru, only had a couple of thousand people. And there was just one mile of tarmac road. All the rest were dirt roads. And there was no movie theaters or restaurants, anything like that. Once a week at the club, they put up a little projector and
Yes,
a
and you
screen.
Right.
And they'd pull out chairs and we'd all go and sit and watch, and the projector would break down 3 or 4 times. And
Yes.
so, yes, coming to Las Vegas was
Was a real
real shock. And if anybody told me when I was growing up, one of these days you're going to live in Las Vegas, I would have said, you're nuts, But life takes us on paths that we never knew. And I left Africa and went to live back in England for 7 years, and in London. And if you tire of London, you tire of life. It's absolutely true. Everything is there in London. But they also have the rotten weather,
Yes.
6 months of rain and overcast, and you don't see the sun, and high taxes. And I received the offer of a job to come to Los Angeles, and I just cast caution to the wind. Fools rush in where wise men fear to tread. I'd never been to America, but I came over with my 2 suitcases and $500 and started a new life, and it's been fantastic. But probably like most people that live in Las Vegas now, they never thought they'd land up living here. And I used to come up from LA quite often and have a flutter on the machine, see the shows and go to the brunches, but I never thought for 1 minute I'd live here. But
Yeah, we all used to think that nobody was born here, but now there are a lot of people that have been born here. But
Yes.
but when I first came to Vegas, it was like everybody was from somewhere else.
Well, it's I think it still is fairly transient. But one thing that surprised me is how warm and friendly the people are.
Oh yeah.
When I used to visit here, I thought they're just all out to grab your money, But
Well, you were gambling.
well, I don't do that now. Once I moved here, I'm no friend of the casinos, that's for sure. I haven't put a nickel in a slot machine since I moved here.
Yeah, it's quite a city. It has something for everyone, and those of us who live here, and especially those of us who grew up here, it's home, and it's got so much to offer that we go around telling everybody how wonderful it is, and then they keep moving here, and then we keep thinking, why are they coming here and giving us all this traffic?
Yes.
So let's go back to you a minute. Are your books self-published or?
Yes,
Oh, they are.
self-published. Yes.
Now, why did you go that way instead of the traditional publishing route?
I went that way, Judy, because when I first wrote, in fact, the first book I wrote, still sitting on my computer, I wrote a book on my travels throughout the world. And then when I was told I had to write for women's fiction, nobody's going to buy anything about a biography on travel. And I joined a critique group, and one of the ladies met somebody who does help people publish books. And she's, I was getting to the end of my murder mystery book, and I took that to him to be published. But he wasn't a publisher. He helps people publish, and he gave us the information. He said, you know, if you want to go through a traditional publisher, you've got to write all these query letters, and it could take 3 years before your book gets out there. And I thought, 3 years, I could be dead by then. You know, if I'm going to go ahead with getting any of these books published, I thought I want to do it myself. I want to actually see it in my lifetime.
Yes.
And I wanted to have the control. I wanted to own all the rights. I'm hoping that one of these days, one of these books will be made into a TV series or a movie. And I would like to at least own the rights and reap the benefits. And it just seemed a quicker process to get the book out there. And it's tough. It is tough, Judy, when you self-publish, but I'm enjoying the experience. I enjoy going around speaking at places. I enjoy doing book signings, meeting the people. You meet a lot of wonderful people, and do I sell as many as I probably could if I'd have gone the other way? Who knows? But
You know,
I'm
I
enjoying
think
that
you were
route.
smart to do that. I, as you know, I've published both ways, and I've made a lot more money by self-publishing than I did with a traditional publisher. And I've been published by some very good publishers, but the problem is that royalties are very small percentage of the money that comes in. And so when you self-publish and you're able to do Amazon, I mean, which has changed the publishing industry
No question.
immensely. You know, you can actually work direct with the readers yourself right away, and now that we have social media, by posting on social media and letting people know what we do, they go buy the book. You know,
Absolutely.
so I think it's a very smart thing that you've done, because being a self-published author doesn't mean that your book isn't as good as if a big publisher picked it up. If anything, it may even be better. But you've just taken it to the reader in a shortcut.
Yes, you're taking a shortcut. The main difference, of course, is when you self-publish, you've got all those heavy-duty expenses on the front end. You know, you've got to pay to have it edited. You've got to pay to have the cover design. You've got to pay to have it typeset. Then you've got to pay for the website, and you've got to have all these upfront expenses that you may or may not ever, you know, get back.
Right.
And if you go traditional publishing, you don't have all those
they
upfront.
pay that.
They pay that, and
but then
you
they take the majority of the money.
Yes.
Which is understandable.
Sure. Yes, they're doing the work, but. And again, not being disrespectful to traditional publishers, I'm not too sure they do so much as they used to do.
No.
You know, for authors.
No.
No, I don't know if they go out and promote it as much as they used to.
Exactly. Well, one of the publishers that I worked with, they required that you buy 2,000 copies of your book. One of the big publishers. Well, I mean, that was. They gave me the book at half price, so the book sold for $25, which meant $12.50 times 2,000.
Yes.
That was a chunk of change to put out up front, right?
That's a huge chunk of change.
Yeah, I can self-publish cheaper than that.
Yes,
You know,
that is true.
It just is a matter of who the publisher is and what the circumstances is and what you negotiate.
Yes.
But I just think self-publishing is a very smart way to go. But I do think you're smart in that you had your cover designed by a professional. You edited your book. A lot of people, they just publish their book without editing it, and that's a no-no. You have to have a professional editor.
And you know, even in my critique group, every time we have to bring something every time we meet that we've written. We have copies for everybody in the group, and every time I read through my chapter several times before taking it to the critique group, and I think this is perfect. They're not going to find anything wrong. Well, as I'm reading it out loud, it's like, oops, there's an error. Oops, there's another error. And we just make them, and no matter how often we read it ourselves, you still don't see the errors. You know, your eyes gloss over them after a while. So,
well, your brain thinks it sees it sometimes because it understands the meaning of the sentence, right?
Yes. And you miss words. It's not just spelling errors. Words that you think were there, that, as you said, your brain sees there, but they're not really there until you read it out loud. And even, the people in the critique group, they'll pick up question mark where I've dropped question marks and commas, things like that. They'll rectify it and come up with suggestions. But it still helps to have a professional editor, somebody whose job it is. And I think it has to be a professional editor. Some people say, oh, well, my wife's an English teacher, she'll do it. No, it's got to be somebody who knows nothing about your book that can look at it totally objectively. It's so important. And that would be one advice I'd give to anybody who's
I was just going to
coming out with
ask
a
you
book.
that. What advice would you give to new authors?
I think the one would be make sure that when you finish your book, it is professionally edited. And the other I would say is in the early stages, join a writer's critique group. They are so beneficial, and they see things and defects in your storyline. They can tell you whether your characters are well developed, whether they're seeing the characters. It's amazing how much is in our minds that we think we're conveying and we're not. And to the extent I've had success with my books, the 5 books that I've come out with, I owe a lot to the critique group that I'm in. And it started out, incidentally, with just two guys and one lady. When I started writing the Chapel book, there were 4 ladies and myself. And I have to confess, when I wrote the Chapel book, they were just amazing, giving me stuff from a woman's perspective. And men and women do think differently. There's no getting away from it. We're just wired differently. We see things differently. And they were absolutely invaluable. I don't think the book would have gotten anywhere near what it's got were it not for the 4 ladies.
How would we find a critique group?
Well, there's lots of writers' groups in Las Vegas that you can join a writers' group and see if there's anybody that's interested in joining a critique group. A lot of them actually have critique groups, but the larger the writers' group there are, there's probably some, that you can hook up with 2 or 3 other people and just form a smaller one. I think there's events at the library where they have workshops and things like that.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yes, I think I'm not too sure, but the library at Las Vegas on Flamingo,
the big one.
there's a gentleman there, he's an author himself, his name's Roger DeBlanc. I think it's the 2nd Saturday of every month and maybe the 4th, I'm not too sure. But he has a writer's workshop. And anybody can go there, and of course it's free, and latch on to some people there. It's a workshop, so is anybody interested in
That's a great idea.
participating in a critique group? It's very, very important.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
And it has to be constructive criticism too. You can't just say this is trash, and we're not there to destroy anybody else's creative stuff. You give encouragement and just offer suggestions, and it's often how things are said and not what is said, it's how it's said.
I think people sometimes don't realize that criticism is not always good. People say, oh, I like to get criticism, but when somebody says to me, would you like some constructive criticism? I say, no, thank you. No, thank you. I don't want criticism in any form. But if you have a good idea how to make me better, I'd love your ideas. So it's what you say. It's the words we use with people. So if we say, would you like a suggestion on how you could be even better than you already are? Oh, yeah, great, I'd love it. But don't say, you want some constructive criticism? I want to say, no, go away. Take it over, give it to Stephen. He'll like it. No, I'm being funny. But,
no, I know.
But I think people have to be aware that words are so important. And whenever we're talking with someone else, we should always be encouraging.
Yes.
I mean, even if you think their work is awful, you can find something good about it. You can point out, something that's got. Well, I'll give you an example. I had an art teacher that we had one student that just made the biggest messes you've ever seen in your life. And every time we would do the critique, the teacher would say, "I love your use of color." And the person did use color well. just because their trees didn't look like trees or their streets didn't look like streets. But the teacher would always find that one thing that was good and point it out. And it really taught me a lesson when I'm working with writers, because as you know, I do a lot of professional editing.
Yes.
I try to point out to them that you did this really well. Now here's how we can make this better. And I think we need to be aware of that, don't you?
Absolutely, no question about it. We have to remember too that not everybody's going to like our work anyway. I mean, this is why we have menus in restaurants, you know, so that people have choices. We don't all like the same thing. So even if when your book comes out, if you get a negative review, don't take it too much to heart, because again, it's somebody that might have thought your book was one kind of book, and when they got to read it, it's another. And sometimes it even almost pays to have a negative review out on your book, because if you get 5 stars from everybody, anybody going looking and thinking, oh, he's got all of his friends to post 5-star reviews. So if you get the occasional 3-star review or something like that, there's no harm in that. We've all got different tastes. We all like different things. Personally, if I don't like a book, I'm not going to go and put a negative review out, because I don't want to knock somebody else's work. Just because I didn't like it doesn't mean say it's not good.
Exactly,
You know?
exactly. I try to read the books of my guests. I don't always get the opportunity to read their books or all of their books with somebody like you who has multiple books, but I like to have an idea before they're on the show. And the other thing is, if I'm going to recommend to someone that they buy a book, if I'm going to look to my audience, to you people out there, and say, this is a great book, I want to believe it is a great book, you know. So I've had people give me their books, and I read it, and I go, ooh. And I've actually called them and said, you know, your book is a good book, and it's got a lot of good information in it, but it's not right for my show. And I can't openly recommend your book when it's got as many errors in it as it does. So I need you to take it and have it professionally edited, and then let's talk about it again. Because if this person were on my show and I'm saying, oh, this is a great book, and then somebody buys it and they go, what is this? They're going to think I'm a crazy person.
Yes.
Of course I am a crazy person, but that's beside the point, you know. But I do try to read the books, or at least skim them, you know, before I have the guest on, because I want to know a little bit more about you and who you are. You're a very interesting man. People don't realize how much you've done. Now, you developed software for companies before you became a writer full-time, right?
Yes, when I left high school, I only graduated high school, never went to university or college or anything like that. I just couldn't wait to get out of school. I was at boarding school and I hated every minute of it, so I just couldn't wait to get out and start working. And I don't know if you remember a company called NCR, National Cash Register.
Yes.
They took me on as a trainee computer programmer straight from high school. And I worked for them in Africa, and I worked for them in England, and then I got offered the job over in California, and I worked for a company there. And then I just started my own business, and that was 40 years ago, and still winding it down. You know, obviously most of the clients that I've had have been a long time, and they're winding down now. They're retiring. They're either selling their companies or they're shutting it down. And so yes, I've had my own business for 40 years, developing computer software. It's a partnership, and my business partner joined me 25 years ago, so the first 15 years I was by myself, and then it expanded and I brought in somebody.
Which brings up an interesting point. A lot of times we think, well, maybe we shouldn't write until we retire, but you've run a business full time, and yet you've written 5 or 6 books.
Well, I started writing very late in life. I'd already started retirement, and I'd never even thought about writing. I'd never planned on writing. Certainly I hadn't planned on writing fiction. But I suddenly realized one day, I traveled to over 40 countries on all 5 continents, and I thought, I'd really like to put all these experiences down, the people I've met, the different cultures, the different customs, and I spent 2 years writing that book and discovered a real joy of writing. Then I was told, oh no, nobody's as I mentioned before, nobody's going to buy that. And I had discovered such a joy of writing at that time. I thought, I've got to stumble across something to write for.
See, who told you that nobody would buy that book?
Well, to be fair, it was a lady publisher, and her company only publishes women's fiction. But I didn't know that at the time. When I went to publish the biography, I'd never met any authors, Judy. I didn't know anybody in the literary world at all. And I did a little Google search, and I stumbled across this organization called the Las Vegas Writers Group. And they were meeting, and I thought, oh, you know what? Let me get up online, reserve a seat, and somebody there will tell me how to get published. And the night I went, that was when they had the guest speaker was the publisher, and the first words were out of her mouth was, unless you're writing women's fiction, forget it. They're the ones with the money, they're the ones that buy the books. And I thought, shucks, I don't know anything about women's fiction. I'd never read Danielle Steele or Mary Higgins Clark or any of those people. But as I said, I discovered a joy of writing, and I didn't know any different. I'd never met any authors, and I never really read the New York Times bestseller list. I knew that.
I think you need to pull out that travel book and publish it, because I know people who buy travel books.
Yeah, well, I'd need a lot of, yes, I'd have to do massive rewriting on it. Massive rewriting, because I didn't know anything back when I started, and hopefully I'd like to think I've learned a lot over the years, you know.
Well,
if you're not learning,
obviously,
you know.
if you're winning awards and you're being critically acclaimed, you're doing something right.
Yes, it's been very, not necessarily financially rewarding, but it's been rewarding in as much as the pleasure it's given me. I've just really enjoyed it, and I'm now close to finishing my 6th book, and hopefully that will be out before the end of the year.
What's that about?
It's a very light-hearted paranormal book, and it starts out with a gentleman. He lives in the south of England in Brighton, and it's the early 20th century, and his parents gave him in 1919 a house for his 21st birthday, and he gets killed, and then we move forward 100 years and to an American widow that spent her honeymoon, a lot of holidays in Brighton, and she decides to move to England, and 100 years to the day of this 21-year-old man was given the house. She buys the house, and his spirit still occupies the house, and he makes himself known to her, but not to her servants or staff or anything like that, and not visually. He writes notes and puts them on the table, and she reads the notes. She can speak back. She can hear he can hear her, and he can see her, but he can't speak to her.
How interesting.
So, and it's how the two of them, from the different cultures of the American and the English culture, get on, and how they banter back and forth. And of course, the sign of the times, you know. He's still complaining that women have the right to vote. You know, we should never have given women the right to vote, and then she goes and has back at him. And so they banter back and forth, but there's a lot of humor in it, and there's a little bit of suspense in it. And
ooh, I can't wait for it to come out.
I'm probably about 4 chapters away from getting it finished, and then of course it has to go through the everything.
Editing
but
process.
it'll be a fun, because as I said, it's very light-hearted, paranormal, and
Well, it sounds
just
wonderful.
interesting. So
You're such a delightful person. Thank you
Thank you.
for being here today, for being my guest.
oh, it's been my pleasure, Judy. I've thoroughly enjoyed being with you, and I certainly hope that your viewers enjoy the show as much as I've enjoyed being here
Thank
with you.
Now, if someone would like to get in touch with you, is there a way they can get in touch with you? Is there
Sure,
a
yes.
website that they can look at? Or
Yes, absolutely. The website is www.authorstephen, that's STEPHEN, Murray, MURRAY.com, and it gives some information about my background and each of the books, and if they click on any of the books, they each have their own websites, and they can go and learn more about the books any upcoming events. They can read reviews and
We'll put
things
that
like
website on the screen as well.
Okay.
So that people can see that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it's just been my pleasure. Thank you so much for
Mine too.
being here. And thank you for joining us today. I know that you enjoyed Stephen as much as I did, and I hope you'll take a look at his books, go to his website, and look at all the different things he has to offer. And I think you're going to find some very interesting and exciting books to read. I know I love to read, and I hope you do too. We'll see you next week.